welcome to today's GrabConversations. Today our discussion topic is staying afloat versus doing good, the private sector's response to COVID-19. My name is Ilaria Chan. I'm currently the group advisor for Grab. Aside from serving Grab, I also serve on boards of humanitarian organizations. I'm an operating advisor for education, tech, venture capital, and also on the committee for Silicon Valley's Women Entrepreneurship Initiative for Global SF. Now, GrabConversations is Grab's platform to bring together industry leaders, government representatives, and thought leaders to discuss current issues and exchange ideas on how to use tech for good. As we can see, the dramatic spread of COVID-19 has upended lives. Livelihoods, communities, and business worldwide have been disrupted in unprecedented scale. What is notable about this current crisis is that unlike the global financial crisis of 07-08 or the stock market crash of 1929, our current crisis is not housing or capital markets led, but a Main Street led humanitarian crisis. Literally every physical activity had to shut down. Hence, the need for rigorous rescue initiatives require both top-down efforts from government, central banks, etc., to bottoms-up effort from people to help SMEs, workers, homeless. They're all equally pivotal, top-downs and bottoms-up initiatives. And the coordination on how to carry out these initiatives is really key. It reminds me of playing a very complicated virtuoso symphony. The coordination is just no easy matter. While the impact of the pandemic varies from country to country, one thing we know is that the vulnerable and the underprivileged are really being hit way harder than the affluent. With that backdrop, today we're actually going to zoom in on the role of private companies in response to COVID crisis. The private sector can leverage their strengths and comparative advantages to create impact pretty effectively if they do it right. And in this symphony, public-private partnerships are just very important to deliver effective outcomes. We see what we're doing right now in direct response and also in the recovery period and the new normal. So today we're really honored to have three distinguished guests who are just more than qualified to speak into this topic, having led many heroic initiatives themselves that require private-public sector partnerships. Allow me to introduce them to you. We have Melissa Kwee, Jennifer Peng, and Glenn Yu. Melissa Kwee. Now, Melissa is the third CEO of the NVPC, the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center. Her career has involved working and bridging the public, private, and community sectors as an anthropologist, researcher, program designer, social innovator, and a catalyst in the private sector. She has founded, run, and served on boards of several nonprofit organizations and ground-up initiatives relating to youth, women, arts, the prison, community development, healthcare, and education. The list goes on. She's also the chairman of MHPL, which is a Pontiac land company. Melissa believes that genuine friendships are the purpose of life and is passionate about building a culture of giving and other-centeredness where people give their best for others. She enjoys family time, learning from children, peers, elders, and strangers, and discovering new stories in the city of good. Jennifer Peng. Jenny is the finance director at Colgate-Palmolive Greater Indochina, where she leads the financial operations for Colgate in Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. She's been a longstanding leader at Colgate, having served the company for over 20 years. Outside office hours, she spends her time volunteering on the board of governors for the American Chamber of Commerce Thailand and HDF Mercy Center. During this pandemic, she, along with the Colgate team, had the privilege to work with various NGOs across the Asia region. Colgate's purpose is to reimagine a healthier future for people, their pets, and our planet. Then we go to Glenn Yu. Glenn is the CEO of Seaoil Philippines, the largest and leading independent fuel company in the Philippines with over 400 gas stations nationwide. Because of his faith, Glenn views himself as a steward of his business and values integrity and chooses to practice biblical principles in the management of his business. In 2012 and 2013, Seaoil was recognized as one of the top taxpayers in the country and top 3 revenue contributor in the Subic port in 2016. Glenn believes that he's not only responsible for his employees financially, but also physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. He views business as a platform to share good news to his employees, suppliers, and customers. Seaoil received the Asia's Best Employer Brand Award in 2015, 16, 17, and 18 from the Employer Brand Institute, World HRD Congress, Stars of the Industry Group, and Asian Confederation of Businesses. Seaoil also established a foundation where they expand the culture of integrity outside the business by actively creating programs and partnerships that can help reach out to communities and their leaders. And the foundation emphasizes on involving local government leaders so that communities may benefit from improved leadership capabilities in an ethical environment. Now, without further ado, let us chat with our esteemed panelists. Why don't we start with an easy question? During this COVID period, what has been the best example you've seen of a private sector's response? Why don't we start with Jennifer, and then Glenn, and then Melissa. Over to you, Jennifer.
I'm muting. So good morning. I think with this pandemic, there have been so many positive examples of companies living their purpose. And as Ilaria mentioned, our Colgate company purpose is reimagining a healthier future for people, pets, and planet. And that started our partnership and support of the WHO Safe Hands campaign. So in this pandemic, we realized there was also an infodemic and a financial crisis. Colgate donated 25 million bars of soap. And on those soap, each box has a diagram instructing people how to wash their hands. May seem quite simple, but apparently not everybody knows how to properly wash their hands. So in the back of this, I'm going to show you a little box. There's instructions here, 6 panels in the back, just sharing how to wash your hands for 30 to 40 seconds. Then on top of that, we donated products. And the reason we donated the products is because the $20 million of products helps to fill a gap. So instead of buying toothpaste and toothbrushes, families can free up their money to buy necessities, food, and the like. So, you know, that's just one of the examples from my company's perspective, but there have been so many out there. And it really was important to see how each FMCG has really lived up to their purpose, their company's purpose. I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely you have. Thank you so much. Over to Glenn and then to Melissa.
Hey, thanks, Ilaria. And first of all, good morning to everyone. Regarding the question, I think the private sector has learned a lot from disasters in the past. That number one, in situations like this, the need is so great that you can't do it alone. And number two, there's value in acting quickly and collectively in meeting the immediate short-term needs. So it's been inspiring to see the private sector, in some cases, competitors, you know, working together during the past 3 months. And what Filipinos call the bayanihan spirit, or maybe a rough translation of that would be a collective common interest, working with government and civil society. And in this pandemic, the immediate short-term needs has been supporting the frontliners, the doctors, the nurses in hospitals in order to treat patients. So if I were to highlight perhaps an organization, it would be the Philippine Center of Entrepreneurship, which Seaoil is a part of. It's probably a good example of companies working together in support of the government and civil societies to help their communities.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mel?
So actually, I agree with Jennifer that you know, there have been so many you know, good lessons, and I think the reason why we've had so many good lessons is because we've seen so much misery, actually, and so much hurt and suffering that's out there at the moment. The one thing that has really struck me, though, is that in this whole pandemic, you know, we all realize our own frailties. We all realize our own limitations, and that it's really not the strongest link, you know, amongst us, but actually the weakest links. that we need to pay attention to. And I think that's just become so clear in this pandemic. But I actually want to offer a kind of different, story in a sense, in terms of the positive lesson. And this one was actually just, it's not so much on the, what we call leveraged giving, which is basically giving what you have and extending it to more people, which is what Jennifer's talking about, or sort of, win-win collaborative kind of giving, which is kind of what Glenn is talking about. I'm just going to talk about just the pure philanthropic giving in this context, which was 3 weeks ago, 2 guys walked into our office. Actually, they called us. They kind of, because we don't have that kind of thing anymore. And they said, look, we are still doing well, actually, in this period. And we would like to raise some money to actually help the micro entrepreneurs of our economy still make it through. And so they said, look, we're going to raise a couple $1 million. And we would love to just support the mom and pop shops that are out there, the 2, 3, 4, 5 person businesses. And they did that actually as private individuals, businessmen, and that's in that sense. And so the collaboration that kind of has evolved from that is that the Federation of Merchant Enterprises in associations in Singapore has actually adopted this. And their couple $1 million will be going to actually support these little mom and pop shops to help them just stay in business during this really tough time. Sometimes it's just the small things and just remembering what you have, being grateful for those things and being able to pay it forward.
I love that. Thank you so much. What will lead to the next question is, in contrast, right? Have you guys observed any effort that from the private sector that hasn't really worked as well? We don't need to mention names here, but would really just kind of learn from what we've observed here, because this whole crisis really has hit everyone in a very hard way. Maybe we'll start with Melissa this time, and then followed by Glenn and Jennifer.
Sure. I think, in responding to, this crisis, it's important to sort of see it also in 3 phases. There's the relief phase, which is just the emergency response phase. There's the reimagine phase, which is that future that we want to get to, that we want, that new normal, that better place that we want to kind of end up, hopefully. And then there's sort of a redevelopment phase, because that's kind of in the middle. There's a lot of mistakes that can be made in the I think the relief phase, where the name of the game is meet the need. The name of the game is not bargain. The name of the game is not dump. The name of the game is not give to get. Those kinds of behaviors are not helpful in that period of time. I think the other thing which I hope for, maybe this is not I see now, and I guess it scares me a little bit that people are sort of thinking, oh, well, we'll just go back to the old thing afterwards. I feel like neglecting to focus on the reimagine part in the future, actually really putting our heads together and thinking, actually, what caused this? How can we fundamentally rethink what we do? I think neglecting to focus on that would be the other big no going forward.
Thank you so much. Glenn?
I was actually thinking about the relief phase and maybe adding to what Melissa was just saying, and maybe approaching it from a more personal standpoint, thinking about Seaoil's response during the beginning. And we're an essential service, so we've remained open during the quarantine. And when majority of the stores were closed because of low volume of business, we really needed to adapt to the minimum health standards, and dealing with the pandemic wasn't on our playbook. So we couldn't support our frontline staff fast enough in order to protect them from the virus. And don't get me wrong, no one tested positive for the virus, but it still caused some of our sites to close. And when that happens, it impacts communities that are counting on us, especially those who rely on our fuel to run their operations. So thankfully, we've worked through a lot of those initial challenges, and we're looking forward to reimagining and again, maybe using our own company as an example, how we can better address these sort of circumstances in the future. So we're doing our best, succeeding in some areas and failing in others.
As we all are. Thank you so much, Glenn. Jennifer?
It's all about learning. So just within my own company, so it doesn't seem so self-serving here, we donated the 25 million bars of soap. We had $20 million of products donated as well as part of the relief. And then we also did a $1 million global matching gift campaign, encouraging our employees to donate across the countries. 50 countries participated. But the success of raising that $1 million or matching that $1 million is not there. And what we found out was that in the relief phase, many of our employees around the world, we have 34,000 around the world, they chose to donate to their local community. Colgate, in our partnership, we partnered with 10 different global NGOs, the UNICEF, the CARE, Red Cross. And the reason we do that is because it's all been vetted and they are recognized by the IRS for tax deduction purposes. So when we found all these employees who wanted to donate to their home, their community, their local church, this is something that we could not do on a global platform. And the second issue we had that failed in raising this fund is because we use a credit card platform and not all credit cards are acceptable. So something like local bank cards and currencies don't necessarily work in the USD platform. So those are two learnings that that come out of this. We're now pivoting to try to figure out how we can best work with the local communities. They have to be vetted, they have to have tax exemption forms and the like. So there's a lot of logistics behind it, but we are pivoting, and that was a learning coming out of this particular pandemic.
That's really good. Wow. Partnering with 10 different orgs. I mean, that's a perfect lead into our next question. Now, this next question is really talking about this idea of complementing and collaborating, which is the key focus of our talk today. How can the private sector effectively complement and collaborate with all these other stakeholders, right? Government, charity, NGOs, public, to ensure that the most vulnerable population isn't overlooked? And I think this question much more focuses on what you think are the mechanisms or methods that can make this collaboration work more seamlessly. Maybe we can start with Melissa again, and then Glenn, and then Jennifer. Yeah, Mel.
She's on mute.
Oh,
okay. So operating at the intersection of the sort of government, business, and sort of civil society, community sector is kind of where NVPC lives. And so this whole idea there has really been around how do we create the sort of platforms to help people just plug and play? Because we know that a lot of times maybe that hasn't been the modus operandi, and this kind of helps to accelerate that. So for example, we had things like this donations in kind portal, which literally came up in like 72 hours to actually help triage corporate donations that they said, hey, look, well, we have some PPE, or we have sanitizers, or we have masks, and we'd love to get them to, the nursing homes or to the dorms or to whoever else, So being able to kind of triage that actually online, actually through a portal was online, offline, kind of figuring it all out, was a key part of bringing those different pieces together. Other kind of plug and play things, I think, we're there to facilitate identifying which organizations had services and products that actually could be, in a sense, more widely distributed at cost, or even at no cost at that point in time, just in the relief phase. So we facilitated that through the site and so forth too. But I think the one big learning in terms of how you go about this, though, is whatever you do in peacetime is what, you reap the dividend in wartime. And so the more you educate yourself, the more you're aware of actually what the needs are, what's going on, who's doing what, and are prepared to respond, I think actually the better. And so, things like we have a Company of Good fellowship where organizations can come together and learn from one another, learn best practices. They already have a ready community that's easy to activate during that period of time too.
No, I love that.
Got to be ready.
Yes, absolutely, because all this stuff just hits us in a second, right? Glenn?
Yeah, I think thinking about the Philippine context, what's happened when the pandemic hit was that there were these organic groups that started to form, and eventually, when we talk about collaboration, it's really providing a platform where people can share information, and that's happened relatively quickly. Maybe it wasn't 72 hours like Melissa shared, but over a course of maybe a week or two. And if I were to add to that, as an organization, I think it's important to know what your strengths are and what you're uniquely qualified to provide. And it's probably best that you focus on that. In Seaoil's case, our strength is providing the fuel to manufacture the goods or to move all the people to where they're needed most. So we wanted to focus on that, and that's our unique capability. So we don't try to duplicate or create something that other people are already able to deliver. So stick to what we know best. And during this time, if you can maybe put up the slide of what we've been doing. So we provided free or discounted fuel across the country to over 80 hospitals, clinics, local government units, and nonprofits to help them fight COVID-19. And we've used our network of stations as logistics facilities to distribute a lot of immediate needs like food or equipment to far-flung communities that have been affected by the virus.
Wonderful.
So stick to your core strength.
That's a great lesson. Thank you. And I love all these things you're doing. Wow. From free fuel to PPE to mental health assistance. That's really very wholesome. Thank you so much for doing all that and sharing, Glenn. Jennifer?
So echoing, I love the word triage and leveraging our strength. I mean, I think the private sector can only leverage their strength, and we can lean on each other to quickly respond to a pandemic, okay? And that's the triage aspect of it. So for, for Colgate, we make soap. We make soap and toothpaste. That's all we do. That's our core strength. And by and large, when the opportunity came to be able to give back to the community, we needed to partner with DHL, who knows how to deliver. And they delivered it around the world. So from concept to execution, while it was not 72 hours, and it wasn't 3 weeks, it did take about 35 days for us to get the 25 million bars manufactured and delivered around the world with the various NGOs. So again, we don't have the boots on the ground to deliver and distribute to all those in need, but the partnership between our company, DHL, and the various NGOs, they came together within 35 days to be able to execute it properly. So that was a major feat alone, because you have to get through the tax exemption forms to ensure that the products can get into country without being taxed, and it can be delivered to the NGOs. So the logistics and the paperwork was huge. So overall, the team really had to rely on the strength of everybody's core, their core talents to be able to deliver and make this happen. So, echoing Glenn's words, just do what you do best, and then find others who can do just as well in a different area and work together. There's so much need out there that I think as organizations, if we work together, we can get it covered.
Really, really well said.
We can get these needs covered, yeah.
Yeah, and 25 million bars of soap. I think more than anything in this crisis, we will not underestimate the life-changing importance of soap for keeping our lives safe. Thank you for Colgate's efforts too, and for your sharing, Jennifer. Why don't we switch gears a little bit? Since today we have the luxury of having, brick and mortar companies, a vantage point from tech, and all of the different kinds of private companies for us to take a look. I'll go back to Melissa, since she's able to work with so many different groups and companies. Let's look at tech, since we're Grab, and this is an area that we are very passionate about, is how to use tech for good, right? So technology can be used as a force for good, but especially evident when we're looking at all the digital solutions and tech. That has been something that everyone has had to turn to in light of the movement restrictions. So Melissa, from your vantage point, what role really has tech companies played during COVID? Especially, I know, you've written articles about it that's been so helpful in educating us. How do tech companies fill in the gaps during this time of crisis? You've mentioned online donations, virtual volunteering, etc. in some of the op-eds you've written. We'd love to pick your brains on what you think about this topic.
Well, I mean, the clear thing is that, we've discovered in this whole period that it's not really just a convenience or an option, but it's an absolute necessity. And really looking at closing the digital divide has been so essential, for home-based learning. How do you do home-based learning if nobody in your own home, owns a laptop or has a data plan? How do you get medicine, to you, or even get support, for isolated seniors, for example, if you are completely disconnected. So tech has clearly shown itself to be, not a sort of optional in that sense, but an absolute necessity during this period. I think we talk about tech in terms of accelerating giving, accelerating the meeting of needs. I think it's also been a way, and so we talked about that in the context of, donations. I mean, there were about $40 million worth of donations that went through Giving.sg just this first four months of the year. And if you can imagine, 30 million was last year's total, so it some days were like 10, 15x, like, in terms of the support. And this was really like right after the solidarity, payments were given in the budget. So of course there's the financial part of it, but I think to me and we've talked a bit about the acceleration of collaborations, which I think has been another really important part of this. But the other interesting aspect that I think we haven't looked at too much is actually how tech has actually helped us to understand, in fact, what the potential needs are, and being able to kind of crowdsource and understand actually where are the needs that are out there right now. And that is the number one problem that everybody always has, is that, we have all these things that we want to give, but actually what are the needs? Being able to actually understand what the needs are actually is actually the area to focus on, I think, going forward. I want to highlight one thing too, and this for me is a big dream, and I think maybe tech can help with this too. There is a saying, in fact, I think, Glenn, it's from it was a social entrepreneur in the Philippines who said, there is enough in the world for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. Less for me, more for you, and enough for all. Less for me, more for you, and enough for all. And I think that whole spirit of paying it forward, recognizing what one actually does have, and being able to share that. I think if we could facilitate that in sort of like the tech space through kind of buy one, give one types of initiatives, where e-commerce could help, make that happen. I think that would be tremendous, just at the meeting of the physical need perspective. But at the social need, and I think that this pandemic has really just exposed just how socially actually disconnected we are. And even though we're supposed to be socially distanced, it's the time when we need to really be so socially connected. How is it that we can then use technology to actually facilitate those the relationships, the befriending? If somebody is by themselves, 24/7. And they have medical needs, or they have a disability, or they have no next of kin, with them. How do we use technology to to identify those groups, and then reach those groups in a manner where we can just say, hey, have you had your meal, right? So to me, technology is not just about accelerating, innovation. Of course, that's amazing. It's not just about sort of facilitating collaboration. Of course, we have to do that, it is also about how do we understand what the needs are and meet those needs at not just a transactional, but at a human and relational level too.
I love that. And I actually had goosebumps when you talked about the need versus greed issue, because that I feel like that's probably one of the reasons so many people are so angry right now in the world, because they feel like, because of some people's greed, their needs are not being satisfied. And what you described is actually just this really wise, loving way to redistribute resources so that everybody has enough to flourish. That would really be a paradigm that we look forward to. Actually, since we're on that, I know you run an innovative platform. You founded it called Giving.sg, which is a trusted one-stop shop platform to allow corporates, individuals, and leaders to go online and donate money and volunteer their efforts and maybe even initiate their own project if they're creative, which is really cool. It's breaking some traditional ceilings of what you think charity could be. Is there one quick example you've seen since you've worked on Giving.sg that you think, wow, like this really created a new avenue to allow people to give?
Actually, it's not something new. For us, we created Giving.sg because we didn't see anything out there that actually was like it. There was no one place where you could give your time, your money, your skills to any kind of charity across all the different, categories of need out there. By the way, I think we're still very much first generation. We seriously need a tech refresh and to kind of make it better. But that was sort of like that intent of ours, about 4.5, 5 years ago. And actually, I think the big idea there is not necessarily anything new and huge and mega. Actually, to me, the most powerful expressions actually on Giving.sg are when children donate their birthdays. I mean, it sounds kind of silly and funny, but when kids and because they're in the context of a family that's saying, hey, it's your birthday, instead of getting like a ton of presents, maybe we could think about someone else that we might consider supporting or blessing in that sense. And every family can do that, and it's wonderful just to see the joy and that sense of achievement, even for a small child, knowing that what they can do with $200 or $500 can make a big difference. So I mean, it's not something huge, but if you raise $200 as a 10-year-old for the animal shelter, and then you go and volunteer there afterwards, it becomes part of that whole life cycle of being connected. So, and hopefully you become an adult that kind of does that too. So I think to me, that's been the exciting part about it.
In fact, that is very, very interesting, because what you talked about is precisely empowering every individual. You're not saying charity is a multi-million-dollar corporate's game. It's everybody's game. And that is, I love that. Thank you so much. Why don't we zoom in now to Glenn? Glenn, Seaoil has always been a mission-driven corporation. In fact, when I met you, I've always been struck by what Seaoil represents in Philippines, right? From mentorship to philanthropy to purpose-driven company culture. During the COVID crisis, you guys have done a lot. So from offering free and discounted fuels for 80 hospitals, clinics, logistics partners, and local government, to transporting medical frontliners and distribution of PPEs alongside, just now we mentioned your mental health efforts, et cetera, et cetera. These are all costly gestures at the expense of your own company's profit margins, yet you guys have generously given so much. I'm very curious about what drives Seaoil's spirit of generosity, and how have you seen private companies in Philippines play a key role in rescuing the livelihoods of the Filipino masses during this crisis? Would love to hear your sharing, Glenn.
Yeah, I think, Ilaria, it's important that we recognize why we're in business apart from what we do. And it's something that we're always needing to be reminded of as well. So while we recognize that we may be selling fuel, that Seaoil is really in the business of people. So, and that's really what drives the decisions that we make, the actions that we take. And it's important that we recognize from a worldview that we're not just purely profit driven. We know that if we take care of our own people and our customers, and if we address their needs in a holistic manner as stewards of the business, then profits follow to make it sustainable. So being in the people business, and I love this quote from Peter Drucker, that he says that, he may be into management, but he's really more interested in people. And that's stuck with me over the last, I don't know, 20 years since I've heard that quote, and him mentioning his interest in focusing really on the needs of people and understanding what those needs are. And in the context of our employees, most of the time corporates are so focused on meeting financial needs that they forget that people have emotional needs too. They have physical needs, they have spiritual needs. And I think in the pandemic especially, it may be that it started out as a physical concern, but more and more it's becoming a mental health issue and a mental well-being issue as well. And we've tried our best to work around those issues in a meaningful way to meet our employees' concerns from that standpoint. So I keep telling our leadership team that, if customers are going to be king, and you hear that a lot, customer is king, that you need to take care of your employees first, and that begins by being concerned about their well-being in a holistic manner. So I'm proud that Seaoil, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, from 2015 to 2018, we've been recognized as one of Asia's top employer brands because of that focus. And I think as well that consumers are increasingly becoming more supportive of organizations that provide value in a broader sense. And that's helped our company grow to becoming one of the largest retailers in the country.
No, congratulations. I think, you guys embody really very much actually Grab's mission too, is with great, you have great responsibilities when you are being given the chance to steward different things. So thank you for being such a role model in how you do it. Let's move on to Jennifer, because I think Colgate, we've seen how, you mentioned just now with your efforts in soap and et cetera, and just donating frontline products to collaborate. You guys have contributed immensely in keeping everyone safe via ensuring hygiene, which really is life-saving at this time. I am very curious, since you look after so many countries, right? Your coverage region is Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, and these are countries that probably have struggled from a different scale on the recovery and the economic hit, since there are many developing elements in these nations. How have they been coping from your vantage point with regards to the virus and economically? Any commentary from you would be really valuable. Thanks.
So if I look at Vietnam, they probably are the fastest to recover at this point in time. And only because, right after their version of Chinese New Year, which is the Tet, they immediately had a shutdown. And so as the Vietnamese started coming back for their long Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year holiday, everybody went into quarantine. So I think as a communist government, they mandated that type of protection early on. For sure, schools never opened after the Tet period, so that contained the virus. And then the authorities took really some rigorous actions when it came to contact tracing. They looked at not just the primary, but the secondary contacts as you came in back into the country, and they enforced those quarantines, whether it's state or home quarantine. And then with the shortest lockdown, 4 weeks, no more than 4 weeks, and the economic bounce back was faster. So what we're seeing now is it's almost business as normal in Vietnam. When it comes to Thailand, we are now past the phase 4. We're going into phase 5. Phase 5 meaning that bars will open, a lot of the flights are still, borders are still closed. There's still discussion, and we'll find out sometime today what the ministry is going to do regarding the emergency decree. So overall, Thailand, we're seeing already in phase 4 that there is a business almost back to normal. And then if you look at Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, for certain, domestic consumption is there, but their reliance on specifically Cambodia, where they have a huge gambling industry and heavily reliant on the Chinese coming back, you see some, disturbances when it comes to the unemployment rate there. But overall, it almost is back to normal from a domestic consumption perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no.
So overall, we're seeing bounce backs in the region, and they're talking about creating that bubble. So travel internationally within this bubble should be quite okay. But again, that's going to take time.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I remember you also commented on Vietnam and how they seem to be relatively less affected in terms of GDP. I think just to zoom out a little to look at kind of the socioeconomic situation, like why do you think that's the case?
So because they're bouncing back and the businesses did close down, but they only closed down for 3 to 4 weeks, I think the recovery is much faster. So in managing their working capital, their own working capital, especially for our customers, it seems to be well managed. And the Vietnamese government had given special dispensation when it came to rent, electricity, and utilities. So I think there are, the government programs are going to be really important to help, especially the small businesses, recover. So at this point, I know at least with the Thai government, they're encouraging domestic consumption. They're encouraging domestic travel. They're offering allowances. So that helps along the way. When they initially had the shutdown, they were offering some 500 to 1,000 baht, for those individuals who had been furloughed. So not only can you collect your Social Security while you were under furlough, but you were given these additional cash. So the government has been very proactive in supporting the people. Is it enough? You're always going to have disagreements in terms of how much is enough. So during that time, if you shut down all the alcohol, they had to buy food. So the necessities was really important. And that's why it's really important for Colgate to step in and help where we could. So beyond the WHO program, we donated more products within Thailand, Cambodia, and our region on our own time, because we recognize the need much earlier than the global basis.
That's really good. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Now, I would love to involve all 3 of our panelists now to this really important final question for this segment. By the way, just to encourage the audience, if you have any questions, please type it into the Q&A box now so that we can address it and answer your questions. So to all 3 of you, now we definitely have, I admire the efforts that you guys have all led in helping people. Of course, I think during this time, we also have seen the gaps and also areas where we are learning so that, in future, hopefully it will be a softer landing should something like this happen again, or we are also being exposed to areas we can actually work on now that this event has accelerated how obvious needs are. My question to all of you is that how do you foresee the role of private corporations in relation to social impact evolving following the crisis? In particular, right, are there any existing gaps in current public-private sector partnership that can be filled so that the masses can be, served and uplifted in a lasting way? Anyone can start first. Maybe I'll call on Mel first. Mel?
Okay, here we go.
Hey.
So the role of private sector then. I think businesses have been seriously challenged in this period, and not everybody has been able to have the friends and family or even government support to keep things going. So this is not the end, I think, at least for us. I sort of foresee that this is really that beginning, the end of the beginning. And there is a long tail to the challenges, that we're just starting to face now. So I think if businesses are still in strong positions, if they're surviving this sort of period, there is definitely a need for a fundamental reevaluation. We do need to think about the purpose of business. We need to think about how we care for all of our stakeholders. We didn't talk as much about employees, but I feel like that's a very, very critical part of this piece too. I mean, taking care actually of all of our employees, making sure that they're safe, making sure that they're motivated and engaged going forward. I think there's going to be a huge shift towards really caring for and focusing on people. Like there's the employee part, there's also the broader supply chain part. I mean, in Singapore, we've seen, the great virulence of the pandemic in the dorms, for example, and oversight over those employees, which are they're all part of supply chains, is going to be a huge, I think, reevaluation that's going to be going on going forward. I think for companies that have had to just become so bootstrap and actually lean during this time, I think what we realize too is that there's been a lot of excess capacity maybe in the system, and maybe we waste a lot. So, whether that's food waste or other forms of excess capacity, I think companies are going to start thinking about how they can use that excess capacity in more creative and in more inclusive ways to make sure that they're actually being able perhaps to serve more segments of society with what it is that they do have. And towards that end, we're starting to see and facilitate actually right now more collaboration with the Company of Good. So that's a companyofgood.sg/collaborate. So whether that's F&B companies coming together to create pay it forward meal programs, cloud kitchens, like all kinds of different things, this Feed the City initiative, whether it's retail for good, the buy one, give one kinds of ideas. I think being able to review and reflect how we actually even just do our business, I think we're going to do business better and we're going to make a difference better. So I think that's
that. Yeah, definitely the migrant worker situation is something that was at the forefront of our minds too. I'm really glad you brought that up. Maybe we'll have a different session to address that. But thank you, Mel. Glenn, any thoughts? How do you foresee the role of private corporations in relation to social impact following the crisis? And if you see any gaps currently between public-private partnership that can be filled, please do comment as well.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to realize that besides our responsibility to shareholders, we have a social responsibility. And being an entrepreneur, the question that comes to my mind is there a social need that needs to be met? That there's value in applying our being an entrepreneur in that segment. And I was on a call actually with someone from the UK, and he was sharing last week that there's 10 million people who need to go to the hospital to get some form of surgery or some form of treatment that's outside of COVID, that actually can't go to the hospital right now. That's a huge number. And I think in Canada, there's something like 2 million patients, and there's a backlog now of about 2 years for people to have these optional surgeries or treatment because they have cancer or some other form of sickness that can't go to the hospital right now. So certainly telehealth and that area is probably a gap that needs to be seriously focused on because there's more people that are sick that are not testing positive. They just have some other form of sickness, diabetes, hypertension, cancer and the like, that are not getting the proper treatment right now. And I think that's interesting from the standpoint of what entrepreneurs can do, at least from Seaoil standpoint, and I can probably just talk about this from a historical standpoint, was that Philippines was not and is still a very oil dependent country that depending on imports. So probably the most counterintuitive thing that probably get an oil company to do is to pioneer in biofuels, and that's exactly what we did. And I think for the foundation, what we're trying to do now is really focus on sustainable agriculture and looking at how broken the supply chains can be during the period of the pandemic, and using that to reduce poverty incidence in local communities. So that's sort of the things that we're thinking about right now.
Love that. Thank you. Jennifer, any comment on this question before we move to Q&A?
Well, I think Melissa and Glenn certainly did sum it up well. I think the purpose, okay, private corporations, I think they have a responsibility. So the way I think about the private corporations and what is their purpose on earth? Yes, we're all here to make profit, but we're here for a greater purpose. And how can we impact the social changes? Because there are times when I feel like the social changes have been kind of outsourced to the private sector, because governments are so fraught right now with so many other issues, that when it comes to helping the people, the planet, the pets, it has to be the private sector who has to step in. For certain, you know, as an organization, we look to our 34,000 employees around the world. Protection for them is critical. But then on the flip side, when you have these 34,000 employees, everyone has an intent of doing better. They have an intent and a purpose in life. And I think as an organization, we certainly have that responsibility. I mean, Colgate as a brand is, I think, in 1 billion different homes around the world. And since we've already been invited into the homes, I think it's important and incumbent for the private sector to step up and help activate that type of social consciousness and the changes that come about from that. So it is our responsibility to help our consumers live a healthier life. It is our responsibility to help our consumers become more aware of what their social impact is, because we do rely on each other. And I think the pandemic has been very eye-opening for many in terms of how socially unconnected we are, but socially connected we want to be. So I think that becomes more of a critical foundation for everyone's purpose. Define your company's purpose, and I think the private sector can step up to help us engage again as a society.
No, thank you so much for that. With that said, now we're going to move on to our Q&A. Thank you so much to our audience. I mean, these are really, really cool questions. I'm just looking through it. So maybe because of the interest of time, I'm going to ask a question and we'll have one of the panelists to answer each question. So maybe I'll start with Alice Wu's question. Alice said, I work in the area of education philanthropy, and we had traditionally reached out to corporations for donations for our research activities through networking events and seminars. As gathering sizes for physical events are significantly reduced, we've seen a reduction of touch points to engage our donors and reduction in funding that are being channeled elsewhere towards only COVID-19 related causes. So the question is, what do you suggest for charities that do not work directly on COVID-19 related causes on strategies that can appeal to private corps to continue to support education philanthropy causes? For example, donation towards scholarships. Maybe I'll direct that to Mel, since she sees so much throughput of.
I think that's probably my kind of question.
Yeah.
So actually, you're absolutely right. Even though we have seen this huge spike in kind of donations, corporate as well as individual, to charities, a lot of them have been COVID related. So non-COVID related charities have had anywhere from 30% to 80% drop, in terms of their support, which can be highly destabilizing. I think what's key right now for different charitable organizations is to figure out, how do you tell your story differently. Because in those contexts, you were relying on person-to-person, sort of like face-to-face types of opportunities. You can still have face-to-face, there is still, those types of opportunities available, but I think the challenge is, how do you tell your story in a more compelling and perhaps more personal way? And I think one of the things we've been looking at is really this whole digital fundraising piece, but also digital storytelling. So actually trying to rally marketing professionals and people with skills in storytelling to be able to adopt and connect with charities to help them really articulate, their selling point and their impact, and then be able to attract more support through that. We are also doing an initiative with Dream Academy. It's an online game show. It's kind of like this funny idea, but these entertainers came forward and said, we know our industry is suffering, but we think we can do something about this. So they clubbed together with other people and are putting on this City of Good game show, online. Is like half an hour kind of thing, but basically it's a call to action for different, charities that are, and so we did arts and heritage actually the other day. But you could actually connect with other groups actually in this space too, and actually shout out, together about the need for educational philanthropy as well. That could be one suggestion. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mel. The next question is from Huailin Kaur. He says, thank you so much to the panel. Most of your sharing is B2C businesses. Any examples that you can share on how B2B can create impact during this period? We have done some donation drives and also helped our smaller suppliers, but what extra can we consider? Maybe I'll give the question to either Glenn or Jennifer, whoever feels more comfortable.
Wait, so Glenn, you want to go or do you want me to go? All right, I think in sharing, so B2C versus B2B, interesting question, because we're definitely more B2C business, working through our large retailers. So in terms of B2B, the only B2B we have is pretty much on an e-com platform. And in that case, some of our donation drives to our suppliers have been more individual. So what we've done is worked with the distributors in where the needs are, and then to be able to work through them in terms of how to satisfy those needs. So what we would do is you'd have to reach out to the vendor or your support base and try to connect the two businesses together. So for us, it's definitely more of a B2C concept, but in terms of the B2B world, where we have donated through our e-com online platform, it's always been on an individual basis. So the individual platform would come to us and we would work together and create a program to be able to donate.
Got it. Thank you. Oh, I just saw that Melissa actually says she could also answer this question.
Sure.
So feel free to jump in. Yeah.
So I'm not sure what business you're in, but actually I wanted to just highlight too that companyofgood.sg/collaborate has B2B opportunities where businesses that are companies of good are just listing the different opportunities that they have. So there's ones that are in retail, e-commerce, cleaning services, food and beverage. So a whole range of different things where actually there are more B2B collaborations there.
Great. Thank you, Mel. This next question would direct it definitely to Glenn. I think it's got your name written all over it. This question is from Jermaine Liu, saying, how do you go about articulating and landing on what the purpose of a company is and the true north that will guide your decisions? Often there are many things that a company can do, but how do you figure out as an organization what your key responsibility is? What a great question. And Glenn, I know Seaoil has been a family business, but you also, have been very collaborative in your efforts, and you really see this duty to your society as a big force on how you want to serve through Seaoil too. So this is definitely a question tailor-made for you. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that when people think about what business they want to be in, they start with the wrong question. They almost always start with, how much money can this business make? And I know that that's important because that's gonna make the business sustainable. But and I think, Ilaria, you've kind of given the context in terms of where I'm coming from, being part of a family. Regardless of whether you're a privately held or publicly listed company, it's probably best to think about what your shareholders are passionate about, and to think through what the shared values are. So in our case, harmony is very important, sustainability in terms of working with the environment and education. Those are some of the things that we value as a family. And I guess the decision making that and the way we try to prioritize our capital and investment is always going to be related to what things we believe are important. So probably that's how I would try to articulate it and use that as an order of priority. Obviously, if there's a need, then there's value that you can probably add on to that need. And when you're meeting a need, then there's always going to be some margin that will help you drive that, make it sustainable. So I think that's how we've tried to approach it many times. And I'm hoping that I know it's very general as an answer, but
no, that's a really good answer, because it's personal. It's from your own. You live it out in your life. You're not quoting anyone. So thank you for that. Actually, I will piggyback off of that to direct a question to you and to Jennifer quickly. How can a company, this is a question from Kevin's seat, how can a company convince their stakeholders of the value of doing good to others, especially when the stakeholders themselves have been impacted? For example, employees losing their jobs or shareholders losing their dividends. How do we convince the stakeholders of the value of doing good to others? Maybe we'll start with Glenn and then move on to Jennifer.
Well, maybe like I shared early on, that doing good to people is good for the business as well. So some people have it the other way around. The thinking is, when I've generated the profit, then maybe that's when I can do good. But when you start by doing good and helping employees become better people, then they're more productive and they add more value and therefore generate more profit. So maybe you can use that as well as a way of articulating, at least from a shareholder standpoint, why there's value in doing good.
Awesome. Jennifer?
I think that to convince a stakeholder, for us, I think it would be starting with the employees, because we have to live those values. And when someone loses their job, it's going to be very difficult. They're going through a lot of emotional trauma. And more important is that people who are with them go through the same emotional trauma because they're losing a friend from work. The value of what we do has to be trusted by the employees. It has to be something that they truly believe is above and beyond than just the job. And so I think it does start with the employees and being able to convince them and yourself that the value is there, that the value of the organization and what we're trying to do still stands. So even after you go through a reorganization and all employees may be a little demoralized, they've got to come back up and say, look, this still is what I believe in. Otherwise, it just won't work. Because if it doesn't work in the organization, it's not going to be conveyed in the products that we sell, in the trust that we instill in our consumers. So it starts with the employees. It starts with the leadership and the employees to be able to communicate that effectively and live the words, walk the talk.
Yeah.
So it's got to start internally.
Gosh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, Jennifer, I just really want to echo that point too. I think, your point around just practicing it internally and the leadership and so forth is so key, because, it's difficult for everybody. But I think when employees know that your senior management has taken the hit first and they've done everything they can first to protect jobs and as best they can, and sometimes that it's not enough. But I think people need to know that you're always putting someone else first. And I think that you're right. That does build the kind of confidence and credibility and trust that's actually necessary for all these businesses.
Thank you so much for saying that. And of course it really hits dear to all our hearts. I mean, at Grab, we've also had to unfortunately see recently that we had to make some difficult decisions too on the on that front. And in many ways, I've seen for months before that, right, since COVID hit, at the end of when Chinese New Year, end of January, it's been 5 months. I've really seen how the leaders in the company are like, we got to exhaust every other option before we even think about laying people off. So from being so stringent on cutting costs to like, let's use less expensive enterprise, to all the leaders, let's take a pay cut, to people who can go on no pay leave. I've just seen how it's been a painfully strenuous process, but it comes from really caring about the employees, right? But at the same time, I also recognize that, to make a positive impact as a private company in a region like Southeast Asia, companies need to make the right choices for all the stakeholders. And that is supremely difficult. You got to please your investors, your shareholders, and then there's your employees. And then there's also, people that you're trying to help, pro bono, and then the governments, right? And everybody wants something different. And how do we do a really good job to make sure we can please and serve everyone? So for us at Grab, it's definitely not been an easy season, but I think I've seen how our leadership has, just made a great example. I mean, our CEO was actually, weeping when he was announcing this difficult decision. And we are by no means perfect, but I think that what you guys have just said, when you live it out every day and you do your best, you can go to sleep at night thinking, okay, tomorrow we'll come back in and we'll be better versions. But the key is we learn from each other and you really care about all the people that are involved. Now, unfortunately, there's some really great questions too. I wish we could get to all of them, but we only have 9 minutes left. So I just want to first and foremost thank all our panelists for being here with us Friday morning. I know their times are very, very precious. And to really thank the audience too for taking an interest in this. I know we went over many sophisticated topics today, but I feel like my takeaway has actually been glaringly simple. We all need each other. Whether we are private companies, governments, NGOs, or other education institutions, etc., we must partner together to fill in the gaps where our individual reach is limited. But together we can actually help prosper the underserved. The tricky thing is, especially with regards to today's topic, is that private companies are not charities, right? So while many hopes to play a broader role in helping society, they have to be accountable to what I mentioned: investors, shareholders, employees, stakeholders, etc. So that balance is extremely tough. But at the end of the day, there will always be needs that are unmet, and each day we can learn to do better. From listening to the stories from our esteemed panelists, it is clear that private corporations can partner with governments and other stakeholders to deliver on powerful outcomes, because private sector often has the agility and innovation, right? I've seen just incredible things come out of Google, come out of all of you guys' companies. Everyone has a different part to play. Whereas I see governments, they have the power to make crucial things happen for a nation in a centralized and scalable way. And then you have the NGOs who are, mission oriented, so focused on the vulnerable. Hence, they have great intel on the needs of the underprivileged. So I feel like if we put all of this together, right, we can really create outcomes that are just far more impactful than if we acted individually, and we can transform lives together. So Melissa, Glenn, and Jennifer, on behalf of Grab, I thank you again for your valuable insights today, and more importantly, for your fiercely impactful work out there on the field. We look forward to drive Southeast Asia forward together with you all. And to the audience, I just want to thank you all for being with us. So the replay will be available to today's talk. We will be posting it on social media, etc., so that you can have access to the content today. And we hope that you guys will all fight the good fight with us. Actually, since I have a couple minutes, so there's one question by Christopher G, which I feel like is not even a question because it's so well written that it's almost like an additional conclusion, but I will read it out. And if any panelists want to have a final comment to it, please do, and we'll round it up. So Christopher said, partnerships. The community spirit encapsulated by Bayanihan, forgive me if I don't pronounce it right, is generally done by companies that already prioritize social responsibility. Does the panel feel that there has been a major shift in private sector corporate behavior post-pandemic, that the strongest businesses going forward are those that are best integrated into their societies and communities, interacting with the communities in which they operate, not only transactionally, but also as a pillar of the community? So anyway, it's so well written, I feel like it's an answer, but if any of you guys have a comment on this, would love to end it with that. Anyone?
Well, I do think, and it is a very good question answer. I think Melissa said it earlier, the companies that have a healthy balance sheet, you have to have a healthy balance sheet to be able to do what you want to do. And those with a healthy balance sheet do have that responsibility because they got the healthy balance sheet through the consumers or whatever business they're in. So you have to be able to have that social responsibility, like the company's purpose to be able to integrate yourself into society. So if you have a healthy balance sheet, if you're capable of giving, I thoroughly encourage every organization to relook at what their purpose is to be able to give. But it has to be somebody who has already had the financial ready backing to be able to do what they're planning to do. So I think it's a great question. And yeah, I think there's a pre and post pandemic. I think that was always something that a lot of corporations are fully aware of in terms of their purpose.
Any comments from Mel or Glenn?
Maybe I'll just say that I think that we cannot waste the crisis, and that actually the best companies will take the advantage now to reimagine actually what that future looks like, and they will make it.
Beautifully said. Glenn, any last words today from you?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question and conclusion at the same time. And maybe if I were just to add, we might be practicing physical distancing, but that doesn't mean that we're supposed to stop in terms of developing those relationships. And I think the best outcome would be moving from a transactional mindset to a relational one, whether you're an NGO or a corporate. And I think that mindset should be first and foremost in the situation that we're in.
That's really beautiful. So relational, not just transactional. Let's think less from a vantage point of greed, but more the need, especially the need of others. I hear so much empathy from today, and really, for the purpose of today's topic too, is as companies, we have to juggle healthy balance sheet, the right business decisions, the right way to organize cost and driving our business, at the same time caring about the flourishing of all our stakeholders. Let's stick together and make this future a possibility, that we can do all this well together. Thank you again to all our panelists. And just very quickly to our audience before we log off, please fill up the post-event survey. Our team will flash a QR code and send the link through the chat. Thank you for spending your time with us. I definitely have goosebumps just from so many takeaways. Thank you all. And thank you all for joining us, audience. Look forward to seeing you again on our next Grab Conversation. Goodbye.